Lord.
Hallelujah.
What the Lord has done for me, I cannot tell it all. Where do I start? I will just start anyhow by saying that God has done it again.
Amen.
Yes, because He keeps doing it. He keeps on doing good things. He keeps on doing good things. If you see my husband come out to marry me again, it is
Let's get the kiss though.
it is because something has happened, which is very great. We have delivered 2 children in Cameroon. So we adopted them, and the adoption procedure went through just a few days ago. So the family has increased by 2.
That's right.
The name of the children, their names are Emmanuel and Joy, 14 and 10. Emmanuel is 14 and Joy is 10 years old. Emmanuel Richard and Joy Richard.
So go up to 4 now.
Amen.
Okay, I hope everybody enjoys Reverend Martin Luther King's Day. Don't forget he was a reverend. The church he grew up in with his dad was called the Ebenezer Baptist Church.
Amen.
So very good fruit came from the Baptist church.
Amen.
Okay, so like we've been saying, tomorrow is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And it's a day where we celebrate the life of Martin Luther and the different things that he accomplished and the different things that he fought for. So his actual birthday is on January 15th, which was this past Wednesday. And I mean, at work, we're able to celebrate that with some of the kids. And it's always good to remind kids, especially kids that are in a room filled with so many different people from different backgrounds, of different skin color, why they're able to sit in that room together. And so just a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. He had a speech that he wrote and said during March on Washington, D.C. And it was a very important speech because there was a lot of big highlights in that speech that led to a lot of different policy changes in America. And I don't know if y'all have ever gotten an opportunity to read it. I've read it maybe once or twice, and every time you read it, there's different things that you can pick out of it that means so much, and that has meaning today, that has meaning when Jesus was still around. And like Brother Robert said, he was a reverend and he was from the church, and that's where he got most of his motivation and most of his thoughts and beliefs. And so there are just a few things that I'm going to read from here. I know we don't have time to read all of them. Let me see. So the first part of his speech really spoke about the neglect that America was doing to African Americans back in that time. The segregation that was going on, and also the promises that were made during the Constitution. Okay, when the Constitution was made, it said that freedom was for all men, all Americans. Okay, all Americans were able to get the different liberties. Well, there were people that were Americans that were born in America that didn't receive those liberties that other people received. And so the beginning of that, let me read an excerpt which I thought was actually pretty thought-provoking. It says, "It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds." Okay, I don't know if you are very versed in writing checks and knowing when your checks get bounced, but I think that's pretty powerful to use that analogy of when you write a check to the bank and then you cannot cash that check. That's what he was saying that America had done. They had made a promise that everybody was going to be free, and they gave that check to the people, but the people couldn't cash that check. Okay, that check was uncashable. There wasn't enough for everybody. Okay, and he spoke a little bit about how in America at that time there was a lot of wealth, but that wealth wasn't distributed, okay, to all American citizens. And so he spent the first part of his speech talking about that, and then he spent a good part of his speech talking about how you should protest something. Okay, when Jesus was on earth and he was talking to the people, he was saying, if someone comes to you and slaps your right cheek, what do? You turn the other cheek and let them slap that one as well. Okay, and so he was talking, and he had this paragraph that talked about nonviolent protests. Okay, and I'm going to read that paragraph in its entirety. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all white people. For many of our white brothers, evident by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. All right, and he was talking a little bit about, there was a group called the Black Panthers who was not as peaceful, okay? They protest, and they were very violent in the way they protested, and that wasn't what Martin Luther believed in, and that wasn't what God asked for us whenever things don't go our way, okay? Whenever people are oppressing us, he doesn't ask us to be violent towards them. And so he wanted to make sure that he really hit that point, that it's not only us versus them, okay? There are plenty of people at that time that were white that also came to his speeches, also fought alongside him and believed the same things that he did. And there are people of Asian background, people from Europe, people from all over, okay, that came together. And like he was the head of it, of the movement, but there were so many other people that believed in the same things, and that we need to know that it's not us versus them, it's all of us together. Okay, and towards the end, he really spoke more about how God created us. Let me see if I can find this passage. Okay. Let me read this passage in its entirety. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream, that I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out its true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then he goes on to say more things about God's children and how God created us all in his image, okay? Not in his image as skin color, in his image as the way we look. He created us in his image to act the way that he wants us to act, the way that he would act. And so that's what he meant by all men are created in his image. And that's what Martin Luther King was trying to say here, that we're all God's children. And so this entire speech is something that I know people have studied. He's received awards for it. But if you're able to get some time to actually read it, sit down and read through it, there are bits and pieces of it that I think that would be really powerful and that I think will stick with you. And I'm just going to read this last paragraph of this speech, and then I'll close. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. Okay? And so, I mean, you all know today, you all know the struggles that you go through, you all know the struggles that the country goes through, that the world goes through. This speech was very important back then, and it's still important today. No matter how far we go into this life, how many years God decides for us to stay on this earth, we're going to have those trials and tribulations. We're going to have plenty of discrimination. that stuff is still going to exist. I mean, I wish it wouldn't, but it still will. And so we have to understand that fact, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting for equality, and that doesn't mean that we stop fighting to end discrimination. We keep fighting, we keep pressing on, okay? Until God comes back and takes us up to heaven with him, we have to keep pressing on. And so that's what this speech really means to me, and hopefully everybody else can get something out of the speech as well.